All right, safety and risk management pros, welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into something I know you guys think about all the time.
Oh, yeah.
OSHA settlements.
The big one.
We're going to be looking specifically at OSHA's Field Operations Manual, Chapter 8, which covers settlements.
That's right. We're going to break it down, make it simple, and pull out those golden nuggets.
You know, nobody wants an OSHA inspection. They happen, and when they do, you need to know what to do.
Absolutely. And we're going to equip you with the knowledge to effectively navigate the settlement process.
So let's get right into it. Let's talk about our options when it comes to settling with OSHA.
Okay, so you have a few different paths that you could find yourself on. The first one is called an informal settlement agreement.
Okay.
Or ASA. This happens before you formally contest a citation.
So this is kind of like sitting down and hashing it out with OSHA directly.
Exactly. Now, if you do decide to contest the citation, we move into what's called a formal settlement agreement,
Okay.
which is negotiated after you've filed a notice of contest.
So this is a little bit more official, I'm guessing.
Yeah, you got different players involved, a different procedure, and then there's a third one that's less common. It's called a corporate-wide settlement agreement.
Okay.
Or a CSA.
Corporate-wide.
Corporate-wide.
That sounds like it's some serious stuff.
This is usually when you're talking about some systemic safety issues that are affecting multiple work sites within a company. So OSHA is basically saying this isn't a one-off problem. We got to go to the root of the cause here.
Gotcha. So different situations, different types of settlements. No matter what, though, who has the power in these negotiations?
Ultimately, the OSHA area director, they have a lot of authority when it comes to settling these cases.
Okay, like what kind of authority are we talking?
Well, they can adjust things like abatement dates, those
Yeah.
deadlines to fix the issue. They can actually reclassify violations.
Really? So a willful violation could be downgraded to serious?
Exactly, and that can make a huge difference in what your penalties end up being. In fact, they can even modify or withdraw penalties altogether.
Huh. I thought those OSHA fines were like calculated by some formula set in stone.
There's actually some wiggle room there, and that's why it's so important to understand this settlement process. And here's a little pro tip. The more you can demonstrate a commitment to improving your safety and health programs, the better your chances of getting a favorable outcome.
So it's not just about fixing the violation, it's showing OSHA that you're serious about safety overall.
100%. Now, one of the key parts of this whole process is the informal conference.
Okay.
This is where you get to sit down with OSHA, present your side of the story, and potentially reach an ISA.
Okay, so this is our chance to make a good first impression. Are there any tips in the manual on how to handle that meeting?
Yeah, actually, they do give us some advice. Number one, if you're bringing a lawyer, let the area director know in advance so they can have their counsel present as well. You want to make sure that's a level playing field. And always document everything.
So take good notes of who said what.
Absolutely. Keep a record of everything that's said. Any agreements, disagreements. And if you can, and you've already abated the violation, bring proof. Pictures records anything to show you've taken action.
Okay, so let's say we've had our informal conference. We've showed OSHA that we're on top of things. What happens next?
Ideally, the area director will present you with a settlement offer. You look it over. If everything looks good, you sign that ISA. But here's the catch. You only have 15 working days.
15 working days?
Yeah, to make a decision.
That's not a lot of time.
If you don't sign that ISA or formally contest those citations within those 15 days, those citations become final. No more negotiation. No more wiggle room.
Okay, so we got to be decisive. But let's say we sign the ISA and then realize there's something in the agreement we want to change. Can we just make a little edit?
No, that's a big no-no. If you alter that ISA after you've signed it without OSHA's approval, it's basically like you're throwing down the gauntlet.
Really?
They could consider that a notice of contest.
So even a tiny change could escalate things.
Exactly. Always communicate with the area director if you have any questions or concerns about the ISA before you make any changes.
Good advice. So we've talked about types of settlements, the informal conference, the area director's power. What else should safety professionals be aware of as they navigate this process?
Well, one thing is that the area director doesn't just look at the violation itself, they look at the employer's overall efforts.
So if a company has a good safety program, that counts for something.
Absolutely. It shows commitment beyond just addressing that one specific citation. And there are other options they might consider during the settlement negotiations, like payment plans for penalties,
Okay.
petitions to modify abatement. That allows you more time to correct the violation under certain circumstances.
Right.
But even with all of these options, one of the most crucial things to remember is OSHA's whistleblower protection program.
Right. We want to make sure that employees feel safe reporting safety concerns even after a settlement's been reached.
Exactly. Protecting workers is what this is all about.
Yeah.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground here, but we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, I love to scratch the surface. I'm curious about those formal settlement agreements. They sound a bit more intense. What happens if we can't reach an agreement informally? What should we be prepared for?
That is a fantastic question, and that's exactly where we're headed next. When we come back for part 2, we're going to break down those formal settlement agreements and how to navigate that process. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into OSHA settlements.
Picking up where we left off, we're talking about what happens if those informal chats just don't work out.
Exactly. So let's say you had that informal conference. You just can't agree with the area director on the citations, maybe the penalties are too high, or you disagree with the severity of the violation.
Yeah, so what happens then? Do we just have to accept OSHA's findings?
No, not at all. You have the right to file what's called a notice of contest. And this is basically you saying, whoa, hold on, OSHA. I want to challenge this.
And this has to happen within that 15 working day deadline we talked about earlier.
Right.
So you file the notice of contest. Now you're moving from like a discussion to a more formal legal process.
Okay.
This is where formal settlement agreements come into play, or FSAs.
I'm guessing this is where the lawyers get involved?
Definitely. Now you're not just working with the area director anymore. You're probably going to be dealing with OSHA's attorneys from the regional solicitor's office.
Regional solicitor's office.
Yeah.
For those of us who aren't legal experts, what does that even mean?
Right. It's not exactly everyday language. So basically the regional solicitor's office, they provide legal counsel to OSHA. So they're kind of like the legal muscle behind the agency.
Okay.
They handle things like litigation enforcement actions and, of course, formal settlement agreements.
Gotcha. So things have definitely stepped up a notch. Does the area director still have any say at this point?
They do. They stay involved. They'll give the attorneys all the details about your case, any proposed settlement terms, and the attorneys are the ones who will actually draft the agreement.
So there's a lot of communication going back and forth between the area director and the regional solicitor's office.
Exactly. And the manual really stresses how important that communication is throughout the whole process.
Okay, so we're in formal settlement territory. What are some key things safety professionals need to know? What's different here from that informal agreement we talked about before?
Well, one thing is that a formal settlement agreement is legally binding.
Okay.
It carries a lot more weight than an informal agreement. Once you sign it, you are committed to those terms.
Which could include?
All sorts of things, how much you're going to pay in penalties, what abatement measures you're going to take, maybe even changes to your safety programs.
So no signing on the dotted line until we're absolutely sure.
Absolutely. Review everything carefully with your legal counsel before you sign anything. And here's another important point. Formal settlement agreements are public record.
What? So anyone can just look up our settlement?
That's right. Employees, competitors, journalists, anyone.
Wow. That adds a whole other layer of things to think about.
It does. Now, before we move on, I know we talked about corporate-wide settlement agreements earlier. I think it's worth digging into those a little bit more just because they're so unique.
Yeah, they sounded pretty serious. When would OSHA actually push for one of those instead of the other types of settlements?
Think of CSAs as OSHA's heavy hitter. They're usually reserved for situations where there are systemic safety issues across multiple work sites within a company.
So not just a one-time violation at one location.
Right. It might be a pattern of similar violations, repeat offenses, or it could just be that the company's safety management system is just not working.
Okay, and what's the goal with the CSA? Is it just to slap the company with a bigger fine?
It's bigger than that. It's about creating lasting change across the entire organization. So it's addressing those root causes, preventing future violations, not just reacting to past ones.
Okay, so big picture safety management.
Exactly. And because CSAs apply to all of a company's locations, it can potentially affect thousands of workers.
Wow, talk about a ripple effect. So what kinds of things would actually be in a CSA? What would a company have to agree to?
It could be a whole range of actions, developing or completely changing safety programs, implementing new training initiatives, putting internal audit systems in place, even bringing in third-party safety consultants to assess and improve their operations.
Okay, so pretty comprehensive stuff. Does the manual give any specific guidance on how those CSAs are administered?
It does. OSHA actually has a document called CPL 02-000-152. It outlines all the details about CSAs, like who's eligible, how they enforce it, all that good stuff.
So if any of our listeners are facing a CSA, that's where they should go.
That's the place now. Before we wrap up this whole settlement types discussion, I want to circle back to that informal
The
conference.
one that happens before we even think about contesting anything.
Exactly. The manual actually has some really great tips on how to approach that meeting.
Like what? Give us the inside scoop.
Well, it stresses that preparation is key. Don't just walk in there empty-handed. Know the violations, understand your company's procedures, be ready to show what you've done to fix things.
So basically do your homework.
Exactly. And remember, this is a chance to really engage with OSHA, ask questions, explain your company's perspective, and show them that you're willing to work with them.
Yeah, we want to make sure OSHA knows we take this seriously.
Exactly. And never underestimate the power of documentation throughout this whole process, informal or formal. Those notes, those records of conversations, decisions, deadlines, they can really save you down the road.
Right. If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen.
Exactly. We've covered a lot here, from informal agreements to formal settlements and those big impact CSAs.
It's clear that there's a lot more to OSHA settlements than meets the eye. And knowing how it all works can make a big difference in how we deal with a citation.
Absolutely. But settling with OSHA is just one part of the story. What happens after that agreement is signed? That's where the real work begins. When we come back for part 3, we'll explore that post-settlement world and how to turn those agreements into real safety improvements. Stay tuned.
All right, safety pros, welcome back. We've made it to the final part of our deep dive into OSHA settlements.
That's right. We've talked about those initial conversations with OSHA, the informal agreements, and even those big corporate-wide settlements, but
Right.
signing on the dotted line is really just the beginning.
Right, it's not like OSHA just takes our word for it that we're going to fix everything.
Exactly. They have ways to follow up and make sure that companies are actually taking action.
Okay, so what does that look like? Are we talking like surprise inspections in black SUVs?
Well, it depends. Sometimes it's a simple phone call. They might ask for some documentation, or, yeah, it could be a follow-up inspection where an OSHA officer actually comes back out to your workplace to see if the hazards have been abated.
So even after we settle, we can't just relax and forget about it.
Nope. The goal is to actually create a safer workplace, not just to check boxes for OSHA.
And speaking of creating a safer workplace, I keep thinking back to those corporate-wide settler agreements, those CSAs.
Yeah.
You mentioned they can have a big impact long-term.
Absolutely. CSAs can really drive some major improvements in safety and health because you're making changes across the entire organization, not just at one site.
So it's not just about fixing the specific violations that triggered the CSA, it's about preventing those same issues from happening anywhere else in the company.
Exactly. It's about building a culture of safety that goes beyond just checking the compliance boxes.
But I imagine that takes a lot of work to make those kinds of big changes.
It does. You need buy-in from everyone, strong leadership, clear communication, and you have to keep monitoring things to make sure those changes are actually happening.
So regular check-ins, audits, maybe even refresher training down the line.
Yep. All of that. It's about making safety an ongoing process, not just something you think about when OSHA shows up.
Well said, and that's a great point to wrap up on. I think this deep dive has been really eye-opening.
I agree. It's amazing how much goes on behind the scenes with these OSHA citations.
It really is. And for our safety pros out there listening, knowledge is power. So take some time, get familiar with OSHA's Field Operations Manual, especially Chapter 8. It's packed with valuable information.
That's right. Knowing your options, understanding the different types of settlements, being ready for those conversations with OSHA, it can make all the difference.
And remember, you don't have to do this alone. Reach out to your local OSHA office, connect with other safety professionals. There are tons of resources out there to help you.
Absolutely. And speaking of resources, be sure to check out Safety One Source. They have some fantastic training programs, consulting services, and tools to help safety pros like you succeed.
Yes, a big thank you to Safety One Source for presenting this deep dive.
So there you have it, folks. A crash course in the world of OSHA settlements. Remember, be proactive, be prepared, and always be an advocate for safety.
Until next time, stay safe out there.